Albuquerque, New Mexico, January 14th, 1944. In the classified Topographic Survey Office of the War Department, Cartographer Vernon Aldrich received an assignment that seemed routine at first glance. Map several new access roads in the northern counties. But when he overlaid the fresh surveys onto old county maps from 5 years earlier, his hand froze above the drafting table. The roads didn't lead to military installations, mining operations, or rail junctions. They formed perfect circles around specific towns. Closed perimeters. As if someone was methodically surrounding populated areas, cutting them off from the rest of the world. Why build roads that led nowhere? And why did every single map carry the same notation in red pencil? Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, zero, underscore, underscore. Vernon Aldrich was 32 years old and considered one of the finest cartographers in the office. Tall, stooped from constant work at the drafting table, with myopic gray eyes behind thick horn-rimmed glasses and fingers perpetually stained with India ink. He joined the office 6 years ago after graduating from the Colorado School of Mines with a degree in surveying. His specialty was mapping classified territories, military proving grounds, detention facilities, industrial zones, all that geography that didn't appear on civilian maps. That January day, the temperature outside had dropped to 15 below zero. Frost covered the windows, transforming them into opaque screens. The office smelled of tobacco, drafting ink, and wet wool coats drying on the radiators. Vernon sat at his desk in the corner of a large room where 8 other cartographers worked. All bent silently over their drawing boards, rendering roads, county boundaries, river courses. A folder landed on his desk. An ordinary manila folder with a red diagonal stripe, the security classification mark. Major Burkhart, the section chief, placed it wordlessly and walked away. Vernon opened it. Inside were aerial photographs taken last autumn and a typed assignment sheet. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, one, underscore, underscore. Vernon spread out the aerial photos. Black and white, sharp, taken from about 7,000 feet. Each photograph showed a town, and around each town, approximately 3/4 of a mile from the outermost buildings, ran a fresh gravel road. It encircled the settlement in a perfect ring, never broken, never extending further into the desert, simply closed back on itself. Vernon pulled old maps from his drawer, county surveys from 1939. 5 years ago, these roads hadn't existed. There had been normal dirt tracks connecting the towns to county seats. Now, someone had built rings. Built them substantially. The aerial photos showed the roads were gravel-surfaced, about 20 feet wide, with marker posts sunk along the edges. Serious work. Expensive. He took his compass dividers and checked all 4 photographs. The radius of each ring was nearly identical. 3/4 of a mile, give or take 100 yards. As if someone had worked from a single template. Vernon removed his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt tail, and looked at the photos again. Maybe these were fire breaks? No, that made no sense. Why a ring? A cleared strip would have sufficed. Maybe bypass roads? Also strange. Why circle a town completely? He stood and walked to the window. Beyond the frost, he could make out the silhouettes of factory smokestacks. Albuquerque lived its ordinary life. Streetcars, defense plants, lines at the butcher shop. And somewhere 100 miles north, someone was building mysterious rings around towns. That evening, before leaving, Vernon went to the archives. A dusty room in the basement, packed with shelves of folders and rolled maps. The archivist, an old lieutenant named Garfield, dozed at his desk under a yellow lamp. "Lieutenant, may I see county maps for the Northern Territories from recent years?" Garfield opened one eye. "Which ones specifically?" "Any of them. Topographic, administrative. I'm interested in changes to the road network." The old man rose, shuffled to the shelves, returned with 3 folders. Vernon spread the maps on the table. 1939, 1941, 1942. He overlaid them using control points, rivers, mesas, the railroad line. And then he saw it. There weren't 4 ring roads. There were 17. 17 towns around which closed perimeters had appeared in recent years. Some had been built in 1940, right after something happened in this region. Vernon tried to remember. Autumn 1940. Something had occurred in the territory. There'd been talk of a chemical spill at some facility. Several towns evacuated. But then everything went quiet. Officially, nothing had happened. He took a pencil and circled all 17 locations. They were arranged within a 50-mile radius of one center point. That center was a site marked only as restricted territory. No other information. Garfield, what's this place? Vernon pointed at the restricted zone. The old lieutenant didn't even look. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 7, underscore, underscore. Vernon got home late. He rented a room in a boarding house on Copper Avenue. One window, an iron bed, a table, a wardrobe. On the table lay surveying textbooks and a stack of sheet music. Vernon played the violin, though less frequently these days. The other boarders complained about the squeaking strings. He lay down but couldn't sleep. His mind spun with concentric circles. 17 rings. 17 isolated territories. For what purpose? Next morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. To his surprise, Major Burkhart was already there. Sitting in his office, smoking, staring out the window. Aldrich, come in. Vernon entered. The office was small, cramped. Maps hung on the walls along with a portrait of President Roosevelt. You working on that assignment? Yes, sir, Major, but I have a question. No questions needed. Burkhart stubbed out his cigarette in an overflowing ashtray. Do what you're told. Map the roads, submit the drawings. The rest doesn't concern you. Major, I just wanted to clarify the purpose of these features. For proper designation, the purpose is one thing, special access roads. That's all you need to know. Burkhart stood, stepped close to Vernon. He was shorter, but his gaze was heavy. Aldrich, you're a good specialist. Don't ruin your record with unnecessary curiosity. Understood? Understood, Major. But Vernon couldn't stop. That evening, he went back to the archives. This time, he waited until Garfield left to smoke, then quickly pulled the folder with maps of the region around the restricted zone. What he saw made his blood run cold. On a classified map dated October 1940, around the restricted site was a zone marked underscore underscore quote underscore 17 underscore underscore. And inside this zone, marked with neat red circles, were those same 17 settlements. Next to each was a number. Some read quote 18, others quote 19, still others quote 20. Vernon understood these were population figures. 17 towns, 6,200 people. All had found themselves inside the zone in autumn 1940. And since then, a ring road had been built around each town. He heard footsteps. Quickly replaced the map, closed the folder. Garfield returned, looked at him suspiciously. The old man squinted. Vernon left. But the next day, instead of going straight to the office, he took a bus to the Northern Depot. He needed to see this with his own eyes. The bus crawled along the frozen highway for 3 hours. Vernon got off in Red Rock, a county seat from which you could reach those towns. At the local diner, reeking of fried liver and coffee, he struck up a conversation with a truck driver. Quote 25, quote. The driver, a man about 50 with a weathered face, shook his head. Quote 26, quote 27, quote 28, quote 29. The driver smirked. Quote 30, quote 31, quote 32. The driver finished his coffee, stood. Quote 33, quote 34, quote 35. Vernon returned to Albuquerque that evening. All the way back, he stared out the bus window, thinking about the same thing. 6,200 people, locked in their towns for more than 3 years. Nobody talked about them. Nobody wrote about them. They'd cease to exist for the rest of the world. Next morning at the office, Colonel Waverly, head of the entire department, summoned him. Vernon climbed to the 4th floor. A secretary sat in the anteroom typing. "Go in. They're expecting you." The colonel's office was large, with an oak desk and a portrait of Lincoln on the wall. Waverly sat in his chair, an open folder before him. Vernon recognized his own handwriting on an internal memo. Vernon sat. The colonel lit a cigarette, exhaled smoke, studied him with a long, appraising look. Vernon felt his stomach drop. Waverly leaned back. Waverly raised his hand. Waverly's voice cracked like a whip. "You will cease this line of inquiry immediately. That's an order. If you continue, I'll have no choice but to revoke your clearance and refer your case to the appropriate authorities. Am I clear?" Vernon sat silent for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, sir. Crystal clear." "Good. Now get back to work." Vernon returned to his desk. His hands shook as he picked up his ruling pen. He worked mechanically for the rest of the day, drawing the rings onto clean vellum sheets. Perfect circles, precise, beautiful in their geometry, horrible in their meaning. That night he couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He kept seeing those 17 red circles on the map, kept thinking about what they meant. 6,000 people, sealed off. Why? The next day he made a decision. He would find out, no matter the cost. Over the following weeks, Vernon became obsessed. He came to the office early, stayed late. Whenever he could slip away unnoticed, he went to the archives. He studied maps, cross-referenced documents, pieced together fragments of information. He learned that in September 1940, there had been an incident at a government facility codenamed Site 7. The facility was conducting experiments related to the war effort. Something had gone wrong. A release. Not chemical, as the cover story claimed. Something else. Something that couldn't be seen or smelled. Something invisible. He found references to _53, established around the 17 towns. To 54 of the populations. To 55, tracking 56 over time. The picture became clear. The government had accidentally contaminated these towns with something, probably radioactive material from whatever experiments they were conducting. Instead of evacuating the people, they'd made a different choice. Turn the accident into an opportunity. Keep the populations in place. Monitor them. Study the effects. Use 6,000 American citizens as test subjects. The ring roads weren't for containment, Vernon realized. They were for control. For making sure no one left. No one who might talk. No one who might reveal what was being done to them. He felt physically ill when he understood this. In March, Vernon managed to make contact with someone who'd been to one of the towns. A supply truck driver named Horace, who made deliveries to Willowbrook once a month. They met at a roadhouse outside Albuquerque. Horace was a thin man with nervous eyes. "Why do you want to know about Willowbrook?" "I'm trying to understand what's happening there." "You government?" "I work for the government, but this isn't official." Horace looked around, then leaned closer. "It's wrong what they're doing. Those people, they know something's not right. Some of them are sick, real sick. But the doctors who come through, they just take notes, blood samples. Don't help them. Just write things down." "What kind of sickness?" "Different kinds. Some people lose their hair. Some get these sores that don't heal. I saw a kid once, maybe 10 years old, covered in strange marks. Like burns, but not burns." Vernon's throat tightened. Horace's face darkened. "Yeah, that's the worst part. Some of the babies..." He trailed off, shook his head. "Some of them aren't right. Something's wrong with them. Deformities. But the government doctors, they're real interested in those babies. Real interested." Vernon left the meeting feeling like he might vomit. He drove back to Albuquerque, parked his old Ford, and sat behind the wheel for an hour. Just sat there in the dark, thinking. 6,000 people. hundreds of children, all of them being sacrificed, not for victory in the war, not to save lives, but for data, for scientific knowledge about what happened to human bodies when exposed to whatever poison had leaked from Site 7. The government had turned American citizens into laboratory specimens. He knew what he had to do. He had to expose this, had to make someone listen. In April, Vernon began writing a detailed report. He worked on it at night in his rented room. 10 pages. Every fact he'd uncovered. Every document reference. Every testimony. He included hand-drawn maps showing the 17 towns and their ring roads. He included population figures, dates, everything. When he finished, he addressed it to the Office of the Inspector General in Washington. Then, as insurance, he made 2 more copies. One he addressed to Senator Murray of Montana, who'd been vocal about civil liberties. Another he addressed to the offices of the American Civil Liberties Union in New York. On April 28, 1944, he mailed all 3 letters. He knew it was the end of his career, probably the end of his freedom. But he had to try. For 3 days, nothing happened. Vernon went to work as usual, mapped roads, attended meetings, pretended everything was normal. On May 2nd at 7 in the morning, someone knocked on his door. He opened it. 2 men in dark suits stood there. They weren't in uniform, but Vernon knew immediately who they were. Federal agents. Quote 69, quote 70, quote 71. They took him to the federal building downtown, led him to a 3rd-floor office. A man sat behind a desk, no nameplate, in his 50s with cold blue eyes. On the desk lay 3 envelopes, Vernon's 3 letters, all unopened. "Sit down, Mr. Aldrich." Vernon sat. "You attempted to mail classified information to unauthorized recipients. That's a serious crime." Vernon said nothing. "Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done? During wartime, attempting to divulge military secrets is treason. The penalty is death." Vernon's mouth went dry, but he met the man's gaze. "Those people in those towns, they're American citizens. What's being done to them is illegal. It's murder." The man leaned back. "Is it? Let me explain something to you, Mr. Aldrich. We're at war. The greatest war in human history. Millions are dying. The enemy is developing weapons we can barely imagine. To defeat them, we need knowledge. We need to understand things that have never been understood before. Not at the cost of American lives. Really? Tell that to the boys dying on Tarawa. Tell that to the pilots being shot down over Germany. Every day, thousands of our citizens die for the war effort. The people in those towns, they're contributing too. They're helping us understand radiation effects. That knowledge might save countless lives. They didn't volunteer. They didn't give consent." "Consent?" The man smiled coldly. "In wartime, Mr. Aldrich, the government doesn't require consent. The government requires obedience." Vernon felt rage building in his chest. "This isn't right. What you're doing, it violates everything America stands for." "America stands for victory. Everything else is secondary." The man opened a drawer, pulled out a document. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a secrecy oath. An oath stating that you will never, under any circumstances, discuss what you've learned about these matters. If you violate that oath, you'll be prosecuted for treason. If convicted, you'll be executed. Do you understand? And if I refuse to sign? Then we'll classify you as a security risk. You'll be detained for the duration of the war under the Enemy Alien Act. That could be years. And when the war ends, we'll make sure you face criminal charges that will put you away for decades." Vernon looked at the document. His hands were shaking. "What about those people? What happens to them?" "That's not your concern." "It should be someone's concern." The man's expression didn't change. "Sign the document, Mr. Aldrich, or throw your life away. Your choice. Vernon picked up the pen. His hand trembled as he signed. He felt like he was signing away his soul. Good decision. The man took the document. You'll continue your work at the survey office. You will never mention this conversation. You will never discuss those towns. You will forget you ever saw those maps. Clear? Clear. One more thing. We'll be watching you. Always. Any attempt to break your oath will be met with immediate action. Now get out. Vernon walked out of the building into the bright Albuquerque morning. The sun hurt his eyes. He felt hollow, defeated. He'd tried to do the right thing and failed completely. He went to work, sat at his drafting table, picked up his pen. But he couldn't concentrate, couldn't draw. He kept seeing those 17 circles, kept thinking about the 6,000 people trapped inside them. That evening, he went home and took out his violin. He hadn't played in months. His fingers were stiff on the strings. He played Bach, the chaconne. Played it badly with mistakes, but he played. And as he played, he wept. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Vernon went through the motions: work, home, sleep. He stopped going to the archives, stopped asking questions, became a ghost in his own life. In June 1944, the Allies landed at Normandy. Vernon read about it in the newspaper and felt nothing. The war that had justified what was being done to those 6,000 people rolled on, and they remained in their ringed prisons, dying slowly, while the government took notes. Summer passed. Autumn came. In November, Roosevelt won re-election. Vernon didn't vote. What was the point? Democracy was a lie if the government could do this to its own citizens. In December, something changed. Vernon received new mapping orders. But these weren't for the Northern Territories. They were for the Pacific Theater. The military needed updated maps of various islands. It was urgent work, the kind that kept him at the office until midnight. One night in late December, working alone in the drafting room, Vernon heard voices in the hallway. He looked up. Through the frosted glass of the door, he saw silhouettes. 2 men. One of them was Colonel Waverly. The other voice he didn't recognize. Quote, 95, quote, the unknown voice said. Quote, 96, quote. Quote, 97, quote, Waverly asked. Quote, 98, quote. Quote, 99, quote. Quote, 100, quote. Vernon's hand froze on his pen. He felt sick. They were talking about the ring towns, talking about human beings like they were laboratory mice. What's the timeline for continuing the monitoring? Waverly asked. Indefinitely. This opportunity won't come again. We need to extract every bit of knowledge we can. The voices faded down the hallway. Vernon sat in silence. He'd thought he understood the scope of what was happening, but hearing them discuss it so casually, so coldly, it was worse than he'd imagined. He worked through the night, but his mind wasn't on the maps. It was on those towns, those people, those children being born with deformities. All of them trapped while men in offices discussed them like scientific specimens. By morning, Vernon had made a decision. He couldn't expose this. He'd tried and failed. But he could document it. He could write down everything he knew, create a record, hide it somewhere safe, so that someday, when the truth could be told, there would be evidence. He started that night, rented a typewriter, bought a ream of paper, and began typing. Everything. Every document he'd seen, every conversation he'd heard, every map reference, every name. He worked on it for weeks, typed in his room late at night while the other boarders slept, single-spaced, tiny margins, cramming as much information as possible onto each page. When he finished, he had 40 pages, a complete record of what the government had done. He made 2 copies, used carbon paper. His fingers turned black from the ink. Then, he sealed each copy in a waterproof envelope, wrapped them in oilcloth. One copy he buried in the desert, 20 miles outside Albuquerque. Found a distinctive rock formation he could remember. Dug a hole, buried the envelope deep. The other copy he left with someone he trusted, an old professor from his surveying program at the Colorado School of Mines, a man named Elwood Pritchard who'd retired to Denver. Vernon drove there, gave him the envelope. "Don't open this," Vernon said. "Just keep it safe. If anything happens to me, wait 10 years, then decide what to do with it." Pritchard looked at the envelope. "What's in here, Vernon?" "The truth about something terrible. Something that needs to be remembered." The old professor nodded slowly. "I'll keep it safe." Vernon drove back to Albuquerque. It was January 1945, a year since he'd first seen those ring roads on the maps, a year of living with the knowledge of what was being done. He felt older than his 33 years, exhausted, but also strangely calm. He'd done what he could, created a record. Maybe someday it would matter. The war ended in August 1945, first Germany, then Japan. Vernon heard about the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He understood then what Site 7 had been, what the experiments had involved. Nuclear material. The government had been developing atomic weapons. Something had gone wrong, contaminated those 17 towns, and rather than admit the mistake, they'd turned it into a research project. 6,000 people had been sacrificed so that America could build the bomb, so that the war could be won. The price of victory. Vernon kept working at the survey office, kept his head down, spoke to no one about what he knew. The FBI watched him, he was sure, but he gave them no reason to act. Years passed, 1946, 1947, 1948. The war was over. The country boomed. New suburbs, new highways, new prosperity. And somewhere in northern New Mexico, those 17 towns remained. The ring roads stayed in place. The monitoring continued. Vernon married in 1948, a quiet woman named Dorothy who worked at the public library. They had no children. Vernon never told her about the towns, never told her what he knew. Carried it alone. In 1952, Colonel Waverly retired. There was a ceremony at the office. Speeches, awards. Vernon attended, stood in the back, watched the man who'd threatened him receive commendations for his service. No mention of the 17 towns, no acknowledgement of what had been done. That night, Vernon got drunk for the first time in his life. Sat in his small house, drank whiskey, and thought about everything. The injustice, the lies, the way the system protected itself. Dorothy found him passed out on the couch. She never asked why. In 1955, Vernon took a trip north, told Dorothy he was surveying some old mining areas for a private client. Instead, he drove to Red Rock, then out toward the ring towns. He didn't try to enter, just drove along the perimeter roads, saw the military checkpoints, saw the signs, __quote _108 __. The roads were still there, still maintained. After 15 years, they were still watching, still studying, still keeping those people trapped. Vernon drove back to Albuquerque and knew he'd never go there again. It hurt too much to see. He retired from the survey office in 1960. He was 48. Too young to retire, but he couldn't stay any longer. Couldn't keep drawing maps for the same government that had done this. He took a job teaching mathematics at a small high school. It was peaceful. The students asked simple questions about geometry and trigonometry. Questions with clear answers, not like the questions that haunted him. In 1963, Vernon read in the newspaper about nuclear test veterans. Soldiers who'd been exposed to radiation during weapons tests were now getting sick, getting cancer, dying. The government was slowly admitting that maybe, possibly, the exposures had caused harm. Vernon thought about the 6,000 people in the ring towns. How many of them were sick now? How many had died? And had anyone cared enough to count? Professor Pritchard died in 1965. Vernon received a letter from his widow. Underscore underscore, quote underscore, 109 underscore underscore. Vernon got the envelope, held it in his hands, thought about opening it, thought about going public. But too much time had passed. He was 53 years old, tired. And who would believe him now? A retired surveyor with a story from 20 years ago? He put the envelope in his safe deposit box at the bank, left it there. In 1973, Vernon had a heart attack. Not a bad one, but it scared him. Scared Dorothy, too. They talked about the future, about what would happen to their things when they were gone. That's when Vernon told her. Everything, the whole story. Sat at their kitchen table and explained what he'd discovered in 1944. What had been done. What he'd tried to do. What had happened to him. Dorothy listened. When he finished, she was crying. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to protect you. If you didn't know, they couldn't hurt you for knowing. Those poor people, she whispered. All those years. Yes. What do we do? Nothing. There's nothing we can do. It's too late. But Dorothy was stronger than Vernon had given her credit for. She made him promise to give her the envelope from the safe deposit box, made him promise that when she died, she'd make sure it got to someone who could do something with it. Vernon gave her the envelope. Quote 117, quote 118. Vernon died in 1979, heart failure. He was 67. Dorothy buried him at a cemetery in Albuquerque. Simple headstone. Dorothy lived another 6 years. In 1985, at age 73, she was diagnosed with cancer. She knew she didn't have much time. She took Vernon's envelope to a young investigative reporter at the Albuquerque Journal, a woman named Sarah Brennan. Dorothy said. Sarah read the document, 40 pages of typewritten testimony about government experiments on unwitting civilians. About 17 towns turned into containment zones. About 6,000 people used as test subjects. She started investigating, made requests under the Freedom of Information Act, got stonewalled. Tried again and again. It took 5 years, but slowly she pieced together evidence, found declassified documents, found former employees of Site 7 willing to talk, found medical records. In 1990, she published her findings, a series of articles in the journal titled underscore underscore, quote, underscore 122 underscore underscore. The story went national. Congressional hearings, government apologies, compensation packages for survivors and families of victims. By then, most of the original 6,000 were dead. Cancer rates in those 17 towns had been astronomical. Birth defects had been common. The government had known, had documented everything, had never intervened, had never even warned them. Vernon's document became part of the official congressional record. His testimony from 1945, typed on his rented typewriter in his boarding house room, validated by decades of government files. In 1994, there was a memorial service at Site 7, which had been decommissioned years earlier. Survivors came. Families of the dead came. Officials gave speeches about lessons learned and the importance of ethics. Dorothy attended. She was 82, frail, but she insisted on being there. Someone brought her a copy of Vernon's testimony, now printed in the official government report. She held it in her hands and wept. Quote, 1, 2, 3, quote, she said. Quote, 1, 2, 4, quote. The journalist, Sarah Brennan, put her arm around the old woman. Dorothy died in 1995. She was buried next to Vernon. The reporter added a line to Vernon's headstone. Cartographer and witness, he mapped the truth. The 17 ring roads still exist. Some have been torn up, reclaimed by the desert, but several remain, visible from aerial surveys. Perfect circles around towns that no longer exist. The populations were relocated in the 1980s. The land was declared a Superfund site, will remain closed for generations. In 2003, the government officially apologized and established a memorial fund. Too late for most of the victims, but something. Vernon Aldrich never lived to see any of it. He died believing he'd failed, believing his efforts had accomplished nothing, not knowing that his typed testimony, buried for decades, would eventually help expose one of the government's darkest secrets. In the National Archives in Washington, there's a folder. Inside are the maps Vernon drew in 1944. Precise, careful. Each of the 17 ring roads rendered in perfect detail. Below his signature as cartographer, someone has added a note. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 127, underscore, underscore. The rings remain. Not just on the land, but in memory. Reminders that even in a democracy, even in America, power can corrupt. Secrecy can enable atrocity. And the difference between victory and villainy sometimes rests on who gets to tell the story. Vernon Aldrich told his story. It took 45 years for anyone to hear it. But in the end, truth found its way out, the way truth often does. Slowly, painfully, but inevitably. The rings are there still, visible from aircraft, drawn on maps, closed circles on the earth. Each one a memorial to the people who lived, suffered, and died inside them. People who were told their sacrifice was necessary, who were never given a choice, who were treated not as citizens, but as data points in an experiment. They deserved better. Vernon Aldrich knew that in 1944. He tried to make others see it, failed in his lifetime, but his words survived, and eventually they did what he couldn't do while alive. They bore witness. They remembered. They made sure that what happened in those 17 towns would never be forgotten, that the price of America's victory in World War II included 6,000 of its own citizens, contaminated, studied, and discarded. That is what the cartographer mapped, not just roads, but the truth about what his country had done. And though he died thinking he'd failed, his maps remain, testimony to a man who saw wrong and refused to look away, who tried to speak truth to power, even when it cost him everything. The rings are there still,